examining his own attitude towards the possibilities of peace, towards the Soviet Union, towards the course of the Cold War.
Art muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me.
You see it on the bridge. Wait, how they get it? If the government had to change the screw in the bridge, they had to shut it down. They got state troopers out there. They got lanes closed. They got their strange machines. How did they get up there?
Peace and blessings to everybody that rest their eyes upon this episode. I want to give a big thanks to you and everybody who has helped support these episodes over the last few months. I'm going to bring Sydney up. Hopefully by the end of this entire show, you get something palatable out of it, and we can move forward into the future thinking a little bit more consciously about some of the decisions and choices that we are making moving forward. Sydney, I am bringing you up. Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I am well.
Good,
Busy
good.
day as per usual. Happy hump day.
It was not until recently that I actually understood what that meant. I never got it, and then it's probably like 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was like, oh, it's because it's like the middle of the week. Oh, that makes so much sense. Okay. I never understood that. I thought it was like some other sexual reference or something. So
Yeah, I did too for a long time. But yeah. Well, look, I know things are a little topsy-turvy, but we here, and I'm ready to go down that rabbit hole. So I'll give you the floor, and I will definitely be in and out throughout this conversation. So I got you covered. I'm gonna give you your solo.
Mm-hmm. All right. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Sydney Lindquist. I have my background in environmental science and psychology. My master's degree is in environmental education. So I really love teaching people about things that affect the earth, things that affect us, because everything is connected. And because Thanksgiving is tomorrow, I thought this would be a very appropriate conversation to have. Food waste is a huge problem, and it's also kind of a very unfortunate, sad problem, considering the opposite side of the spectrum, where developed countries have a problem with food waste, where a lot of undeveloped countries have a lot of problems with starvation. It sticks in my mind because, one, what we're going through right now in the United States with food stamp benefits being cut for people, food lines being necessary for people that didn't need them before. Even military families are being affected by this, and they were traditionally and higher income earners, and traditionally they were the most secure in terms of food availability and affordability. But the combination of food shortages, tariffs, and all sorts of additional effects on costs. We've had a lot of farmers being pushed out of business because they can't afford to do all of the work that it takes to pick the food or harvest the food. There's been a dramatic decrease in farm workers. So there haven't been enough people to farm the land. So we're having a lot of different issues that are affecting food stability in this country as well as around the world. Other things that affect food availability include natural disasters, flooding, storms. They'll wash away, rip up the land. They'll also, with water contamination, it can make it so the soil is not usable for years or potentially generations after an incident like that happens. And then not as much in this country, luckily, right now at least, a tiny bit, but definitely it's more prominent in countries like Africa and Asia. They have issues with drought, significant issues with drought, which can also limit the types of products that you can have and the quantities. And drought also comes with pestilence, the bugs that like to come in and eat all of the crops because that's the only thing available in a drought-ridden area. And they absolutely love our farms because it's fresh food, right, for the picking. So yeah, I thought it would be a really good conversation to have today, given that we're about to have a plague of food waste starting tomorrow. It's something that sticks out in my mind because in my neighborhood, they have a food giveaway, and the grocery stores, the local grocery stores partner with Navy families, and the families at their own homes can give away the excess food that is left over at the supermarket. And it's astonishing how much stuff is being thrown away. And this is just the stuff that's been approved to give away. Some of the stuff is not approved to give away. The one that sticks with me the most is the meats. There's like, for example, just yesterday, I got 9 jars of pesto that were going to be thrown away if I hadn't taken them. And they're not even going to expire until 2026. Another one that always makes me really sad is they have these like gorgeous cakes, just cakes, cake pieces, cupcakes, stuff like that. You'd think that people would buy them, but they don't. And they like 90% of the cakes that my neighbor ends up getting has to be thrown away. And it's super, super sad to see, especially because a lot of these companies don't want to even do this type of stuff. A lot of the corporations will literally just throw the food away. There's only a few countries in the world that require supermarkets to give away the leftover food to the homeless and to the women's shelters and stuff like that, which is incredibly tragic because in America alone, we throw away upwards of 60 million tons of food every single year, which is about 40% of the entire food supply. That's just incredibly disappointing to know. We waste about 30 to 40% of the food supply that we are producing. Some of it is just because it's not purchased. Some of it is because it rots even before it gets to the table. Like the shipping industry can be a mess as well. And this is just the food that's able to leave the farm. That's not even including all of the food that's grown, but can't even be shipped out because it's been contaminated. It has been there's a term called leaving fields to fallow, where if they can't afford the cost of harvesting and transporting everything, they'll basically just leave the food to rot in the fields. So it's a really dramatic problem in the US. And if you ever are curious to see how bad it is, just look up like dumps and food waste. The majority of, a great majority of stuff in the dumps are food. And another thing that people don't really think about is when we throw things in the dump, and we have those like big piles of trash and stuff, a lot of people think, oh, well, like food decomposes, so it's not that big of a deal. But when you pile and stack things one on top of another, in thousands of pounds, billions, millions of pounds, as I said, 60 million pounds just of food, it actually creates an anaerobic environment where the inside of those piles can't get oxygen, and oxygen is what's required to start breaking down that material. So a lot of this stuff doesn't actually break down into its bio components. It really just kind of sits there, and I don't exactly know what it turns into, but I do know that it doesn't go back into the earth like we think it does. That's why compost piles, if you're able to have them, some cities ban them, but if you're able to have a compost pile, that's a really good way to that's a really good way to reduce your own waste. I know a lot of cities now are starting to do like a green can. So you have your garbage, you have your recycling, and then you can put like food waste and organic matter, and that's another good way to get rid of them. If you can't have a compost pile, there's also a lot of places, not everywhere, but they have municipal type of food recycling programs as well, and this is just for like food waste and organic matter, but we really want to divert as much food out of these landfills as possible, because as I said, it doesn't always it doesn't always break down into organic matter as we've been taught. As I said, it's about 22% of solid waste in landfills right now, so that's a pretty significant chunk. About 1/5, a little over 1/5 of the dumps are made up of just food that we have not eaten. And this is, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is incredibly tragic, because here in the US, we're wasting all of this food, but in other countries, people are literally starving to death. Worldwide, about 25,000 people die from hunger every single day, which includes more than 10,000 children. And that's every day. That's not every year, that's every single day. So we're losing millions of people every day or every year to starvation, which is not right, especially when we have such an abundance. It's almost the same parallel as like clothing waste, how we have god awful amount of clothes that we don't use, we cycle through so fast, but then there's literally people in other countries that survive off like 3 outfits if they're lucky. And sometimes they actually live off of the stuff that we throw away. They, like in the United States, we will ship our trash to other countries for them to process through and use. So not only are they not having access to resources, but then they also have to deal with our trash, which is crazy. It's also a problem, not just because of the space that it takes up, but it also produces emissions. As I've discussed on the podcast before, releasing carbon dioxide and releasing methane into the air increases the amount of heat that our atmosphere can hold, and over time it's able to absorb more of the sun's heat and thus raising the temperature of the atmosphere. With food waste, it also contributes to these emissions. In 2017, global food waste resulted in 9.3 billion tons of CO2 emissions, which is roughly the same combined emissions of the US and the European European Union that same year. And both the US and the European Union are some of the most developed countries in the world. So you can imagine how much emissions that they're probably producing from their cars, their factories, their all the homes and the electricity and whatnot. So we're producing the equivalent of a multitude of countries. At least, I forgot how many countries are in the UE, but at least 15 countries worth of emissions just from our food waste. And it's also not just carbon dioxide. It also releases methane. Let me see if I can find the number for methane. If you don't know, methane is, I think it's 65 times more potent. Let's look this up. So food waste in just the U.S. releases 55 million metric tons of methane, which is roughly 58% of fugitive methane, which is escaping methane coming from landfills. And 61% of that methane is not captured and escapes into the atmosphere. In certain, what they mean by it is not captured. Sometimes, especially with like indoor facilities or through other means, they're able to actually collect the carbon dioxide or methane that's coming off of the landfill waste. And so you're able to actually use that and convert it back into usable energy. But most of that is not actually able to be captured and released. Just want to give you the official number. I always forget. Okay. Methane is about 28 to 30 times stronger over 100 years than carbon dioxide in terms of how much heat it can trap. And then in 20 years, it's about 80 times stronger. And that's because methane does decompose in the environment much faster than carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide will last decades, multiple decades, where methane typically can only last, carbon dioxide can last centuries. Methane can only last a couple decades. So its capacity for warming is far more significant than carbon dioxide, but luckily for us, it does not last as long in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide does. Which is not to say we shouldn't take carbon dioxide seriously, but it is still a slight bit of luck that we don't have to worry about methane for as long as we have to worry about carbon dioxide. But as I said, both of these are released into the environment from these landfills. There are certain products within like the categories of food that also release more or less based on what type of food they are. One of the big foods that people really villainize is beef production, animal production. The production of these releases higher emissions than any other type of food. Beef and lamb generate 13 times more emissions than tomatoes. That was the one that they used in this particular study to compare. And it if you have the amount of animal products and meat products that we consume and we produce, that would potentially lead to a reduction of 4.27 gigatons of CO2 from the global system, which is extremely, extremely significant. Another food group that really contributes significantly to emissions and particularly waste-based emissions from in landfills is cereals and pulses. Pulses are like wheats and like the grains, those type of things. That is about between a half and 3/4 of the emissions, because of the high carbohydrate content. It generates higher emissions, especially when it breaks down. The carbs, I mean, it literally has carbon in it. It's basically a hydrated carbon. So when it breaks down, it's basically just releasing straight carbon out into the atmosphere. So carbon, I mean, grains and beef are some of the worst foods for the environment. And not just with the breakdown of those foods, but also production. A massive amount of emissions come from farming beef. And I could probably do a whole episode on beef production on its own, just because it is so damaging to the environment. Not only is their manure extremely toxic to waterways, they also can release a lot of bacteria and diseases into the environment. They can transmit diseases to wildlife. They also produce a tremendous amount of flatulence, which also turns into methane, or which is methane, especially if they're on a corn-fed diet. Grass-fed cows, which is why like grass-fed beef is considered healthier. Not only are the cows healthier, but corn-fed cows produce more gas inside because of the way that the corn breaks down. It breaks down more slowly, doesn't have as many nutrients. And so it is better to use grass-fed animals to produce meat. Not only is the meat going to be healthier for you because they're going to have more nutrient absorption within their tissues, but they're also going to be healthier animals, and they're not going to be releasing the same amount of methane breakdown as they would on a corn-fed diet. Not only that, but corn-fed animals are more likely to receive antibiotics and other types of medicines that, again, go into the system. We have a huge antibiotic problem in the world as well. And because there's not as many nutrients, they're more likely to get sick. It's a whole cycle. But and the last bit about cows is they need a tremendous amount of land to produce cows. And so by creating land for these cows, you basically have to clear cut everything. They trample the land so natural plants can't grow in. There's no space for trees. Oftentimes they pick forested areas to just cut down and then use those for the cows. So there's I could make a whole episode on just cows because they're a very substantial component to our entire food system and the problems that we're having with environmental sustainability. They're their own kind of category. But halving meat consumption and having cutting in half food loss and waste generation would result in 43% reduction in global food waste emissions. And this was a study done in 2017, I believe, or no, 2023. So now that would probably do even more for the environment than it already does, because obviously we've increased in population, and with the push for more high processed foods, especially with food shortages and stuff, people start to rely on prepackaged meals. And like I've been hearing that with at least in America, with the rise of, with the decrease of food SNAP benefits, on Google, there's been a rapid increase of people looking up like ramen meals and macaroni and cheese meals and hamburger helper type meals. So people are starting to go back to a lot of the easy meals just because those are the cheapest things to afford, which is really unfortunate. There are ways to eat healthy without having to buy processed foods, but the combination of the cost, the lack of education in those areas, and people's lack of time, it makes it very hard for people to even consider trying to make their own food at home, because it is technically cheaper to make all of your own food at home, but it involves a lot more mental management because most of the fresh food doesn't last all that long in the fridge. Like if you want to have salads every day, you're gonna have to buy lettuce every single week, because by the end of the week or the end of 2 weeks, depending on what type of lettuce you have, it's going to be all sad and wilty. And that's another thing that contributes to the food waste. It's people have a hard time managing the food in their fridge. I myself have this issue where because I have ADHD, I will have an idea of this food that I want to create one day, and then by the next day I'm like, I'm not interested in anymore. So then I have like 3 heads of lettuce just rotting away in my fridge because I'm like, I don't really want the salad anymore. And this element of like pickiness now, where we have been so accustomed to like pleasure meals and fast food and things that taste like wildly good because they put all this stuff in it. We aren't very good at like managing our kitchens anymore. Back in the 30s and prior, women, or not women, but just people in general, were very good at making do and making use of whatever they had. People were pickling vegetables. They were turning fruit into pastries and pies and preservatives and all preserves, not preservatives, and all sorts of different products that could be used years later, like that would last. They'd salt things, as I mentioned, they'd pickle things, they would ferment things, and all of these methods of preservation allow things to last far longer than their normal cycle, their life cycle. But we don't really have any education for that anymore. And because of the way that they've manufactured food today, most of that stuff doesn't even seem palatable to most people because we're so used to these highly salty, highly sugary, extremely fatty foods that taste so good that a fresh salad with no dressing is super unappetizing to most people. We've very much drifted away from our natural way of eating. And instead of people relying on fresh foods, most people might not, like, I bet there's hundreds of thousands of kids that have never eaten a full apple before, or had never eaten a full carrot, or have never even seen food being pulled out of the ground. You would not believe how many people I have seen just online or even talked to that weren't aware of where their food came from. I think this is a sad but forgotten component of the whole food system, is lack of education. Because if you understand where food comes from, you're more likely to respect it. You're more likely to appreciate it more, because it's not just some like ethereal thing that comes out of nowhere that you just go to the supermarket and it just appears. Like, you'll understand the work that is put into producing it, the treatment of the people that are producing it for you, the aspect of how to use it. The more I learn about food and the more I understand food science, the more I begin to understand how possible it is to grow your own food. I've started buying seeds and I've started to grow my own food. I'm definitely nowhere near sustaining myself off of what I grow. But it's something that I think is really, really important for people to learn. When I was in high school, I was very lucky to be able to participate in the FFA program at my school, which is Future Farmers of America. And I remember a lot of people used to say to me, "You want to be a farmer?" I'm like, "No, I wanted to raise animals. I enjoy learning about like it's nature. Like it's our grown version of nature, and you have to really understand the food system to have a respect for the environment, because we cannot have one without the other. We cannot have a healthy environment without having a healthy agricultural system, and vice versa. If we destroy the planet, we also destroy our ability to raise and grow most types of food. A planet that has been destroyed and has a messed up water cycle and a messed up temperature cycle, and like all the different climate areas of the planet are shifted and are no longer in the same place that they were before, is going to have massive impacts on our food cycles, because food cannot be grown just anywhere. Like, you can't just take seeds and throw it on the ground and then expect it to grow. Like, different plants require different types of soils, different amounts of water, different amounts of sunlight. Like, if you left lettuce in full sun, it's going to die. But if you put corn in the shade, it's going to die, because different foods require different things. And if you raise things in the wrong environments, even if it does grow, it's going to be less healthy. There have been a lot of different experiments showing that growing things in the wrong soil and the wrong environment, it'll make the food taste worse. It'll make the food a texture that it's not supposed to be. And it can also increase the risk of it just dying right there. So it's super important for us to understand where our food comes from, how it happens, and why it's so important to protect it. It's the same way as the environment. Like, we care, like, people who know start to care about the rainforest, start to care about wetlands, start to care about the river systems, or the Arctic, because they start to understand why it's such an important part of our lives. And I think the food waste and starvation aspects are two sides of the same coin, because it's a lack of appreciation for what we do have, and it's also a lack of understanding for how the systems work. And it's sad, because since the United States, in particular, is so out of touch with how the rest of the world lives, majority of people, I guarantee it, if you talk to anybody, like, just pick anybody off the street, the majority of people would not understand just how big the disparity is. And they also wouldn't understand why the disparity is there. But unfortunately, a lot of poor, undeveloped nations just happen to live in regions that cannot be developed effectively, because it's a really rough environment. It would take more money to geoengineer and do all sorts of work to acquire these things, but it's still possible. There's a really incredible experiment, or it was an accident actually, that I heard of recently. In China, they have the Gobi Desert, which is one of the most desolate and dead environments in the world. There's very little that can live there. I don't think they really had any plant life, besides like migrating birds and stuff. There really wasn't anything that could live there. Even like the bugs and stuff like that had a hard time living there, because it was so hot. There's no water, nothing. And so China recently decided to use it for a solar panel farm, because they're like, well, it's getting plenty of sun, so why not make use of it? And after they did that, they started noticing that things were starting to survive there. Not only did the solar panels provide shade, but it also captured the little rainwater that was there, and also kind of allowed plants release water through, it's called transpiration, their version of breathing. And that's kind of where dew comes from in the morning, as well as the atmosphere. But the water from the plants, the water from the atmosphere was collecting on and under the solar panels and was starting to basically soak into the ground and make it more wet and more fertile. And they introduced, I think it was goats, into the land. And after they did that, a lot of other animals started to move in because there was now grass. The goats helped to fertilize, which, fun fact, goats have the best type of manure to fertilize with, and as well as rabbits, because the way that they break down the matter in their stomach, that's why goats can eat everything, even though they can't. They break down things so successfully that it basically makes perfect plant food. You don't have to do anything to it. Some types of animal waste is too acidic, hence like dog poo and stuff, it'll like kill your grass. But goats and rabbits have some of the most perfect manure for using on plants. Like most of the time you can basically just throw it on the plants, or like not on the plants, but like underneath the plants to fertilize them without having to do anything to them to pre-treat them or anything. But the existence of those grasses coming in, the goats coming in, it allowed other animals to also start coming in. They were able to use those for shade, the solar panels for shade. They were able to use the grass for food, and a whole ecosystem has started to develop now in the Gobi Desert, which was originally completely empty, and there's nothing there. So this is a happy accident to show that it is possible. Like these barren deserts of sand and nothing else are still equally able to produce a life. We just might need to give it a little bit of a push, help it out a little bit. There's another similar experiment that it's not for it wasn't for agriculture, but it was for people. I want to say it was Saudi Arabia. I forgot which country exactly, but I know it's the Middle East. They made these like giant umbrellas, like parasols, basically. And during the night, I believe they close up, but during the day, they come out and they shade this entire area of the city. And it not only provides shade for people, which reduces the temperature of that city by like 15 to 20 degrees, sometimes as much as like 25 to 30 degrees if it's like really hot, which is crazy. Like that is life-saving. They said could be around 70 to 80 degrees, even if the ambient temperature is like 130. It's really beneficial because heat is a huge killer, especially in those regions where they don't have access as readily to air conditioning and stuff like that, like we have. But they created these, and then the way they manufactured it, it also basically collects water as well and goes into these big cisterns underneath. And so they're able to also preserve water and collect water. And I think they can also use it to like mist people as well. I thought it did one other thing, but basically they had this invention that lowered the temperature of the area and made it possible for people to exist happily and safely in their own cities. They're able to walk about even in really, really hot weather. And so it's innovations like this that show that it is possible for us to ensure the land is able to support us, but we have to be very creative with it. And I'm kind of getting off topic, since of course that's not about food waste. But the whole idea of eco-engineering and modifying the land and making sure that we're creating systems that work for us and the environment is very important when you're considering food, because as I had mentioned, give me a second. Hey, stop doing that. Thank you. Engineering, we need to make sure that we're preserving the land that we have for food, because we need a lot of land just to produce enough food for all the people on the planet. Let me see what the number is. Let's see. Roughly 4,000 square feet is needed to sustain basically a 5-acre farm can support a family. So we'll need I can't do math in my head, but that is hundreds of thousands of acres just to support like our country. So we would need a lot of land, and that's why it's important, if you can, to start producing some of the food on your own, because it'll take some of the burden away. And that's why food preservation and learning how to make do and make use of what you do have is also so important, because this type of stuff is food that ends up being food for later rather than food for the trash. Because obviously, once you throw something away, you'll never be able to use it again. You just wasted money. You just wasted your time because you went food shopping for it, and now you're not going to use it. Or God forbid you grew it yourself and then you have to throw it away. That's an even bigger waste of your time. But by wasting food, we're doing a disservice to ourselves, we're doing a disservice to our environment, and we're doing a disservice to the entire planet. It's really sad to think of how much food has been wasted that could be going to homeless shelters, that could be going to people that are, it would be difficult to send it to other countries because of the fact that it'll rot on the way. But if we could reduce our own food consumption habits and enable more production of food in other countries, to make up for our own, I don't know, I know a lot of them are oh, well, it's for our economy and stuff like that. Why don't we take that elsewhere, take that overseas to help people? We're so willing to take people from overseas to supplement our own economy. Why are we not able to take it over to other economies to help them? Because the better other people are doing, the better we will do. If the world is healthier, the entire economy is going to be more robust, because people that are starving, who don't have enough food, who don't have resources to live, they're not going to be as productive as people that are well off and well sustained. If you're starving and you're thinking of food and you're only thinking of how you can get your next meal, you're more likely to be in survival mode. And even in a well-developed country, if you're living in survival mode, you're more likely to commit crimes. You're more likely to be violent. You're more likely to not be getting working on your education and not be getting a good job for yourself, because you're going to be more focused on, I need to get what I can. And I think another aspect of this problem, which is, again, this is our problem, it's the United States problem, is they very actively discourage people from growing their own foods. There's a lot of very well-intentioned people that would grow their own food if they could. But number one, the way that they've set up our cities, they don't really leave a lot of space for green space anymore. It's either lawns, concrete or asphalt, and plants don't grow in those. And we have a lot of laws, especially in cities, that ban people from growing food, which is crazy to me. If you have too many plants, or if you have too tall of plants, some places ban garden plots altogether. We are kind of making a tiny bit of progress in this way, where there's a lot of community gardens now, but it does depend on where you live, because there are a lot of really stupid regulations that make it difficult for people to try and grow food on their own plots. Not to mention, fewer and fewer people have large plots of land in their space anyways. Most people only have like a dirt patch in the front of their house. Like, their driveways are bigger than their yard. So this is definitely something that needs a multi-pronged approach, where we can't just, like, we need to have an education component where we need to raise kids understanding, where does food come from? How does food grow? What is the effect of food on the planet? Because different foods have different impacts on both the soil, on the air, on the animals, on the plants, on the bugs. Some types of plants are invasive species. Some types of plants are regenerative, where they help restore the environment. Some of them bring in native animals. There's a reason why, like, native plants are really important to include in your gardens, because then that brings in the natural pollinators. You need to have a good balance of different types of foods, because you can't have too heavy on one type of food than the other, because it'll deplete the soils. The Dust Bowl was a fantastic and unfortunate example of what happens when you farm the land over and over and over and over without trying to regenerate it. They were trying to plant the same crops in that soil year after year after year, and eventually it got so depleted, the topsoil turned to dust because there was no nutrients in it. Dust is basically inorganic, broken down rock, where soil, the stuff that plants need, is a combination of broken down by biologic material. There's going to be bugs in it, like worms and beetles and other types of creatures that aerate the soil, that add in holes so the air can get in, which is important for the roots. As I said, you can't just like plant things in dirt and expect it to grow. You have to have the right nutrients. You have to have the right aeration. You have to have the right density of soil. Like potatoes are perfectly fine growing in rocky soil, but if you tried to plant your fruit trees in rocky soil, they wouldn't be able to get any nutrients. Things that have big fruits or like high calorie type of things, like a lot of the colorful items like peppers and all of our tree fruits and nuts, olives, stuff like that, they need much higher nutrient and sugar content than other things. So you need more sun, you need more nutrients, you need more water, because it takes a lot of energy to produce fruits and stuff like that. Whereas things like lettuce and smaller greens and stuff like that, they're not producing fruits, they're just producing their leaves and sometimes a bit of flowers. So they don't really need all of that extra stuff. They can grow in a little bit less fruitful soil, no pun intended, or pun intended, I guess. So it's important for people to know and understand how the food system works. We also need to allow the food system to flourish. We can't just keep treating it the way that we do. The government is very much a monocultural advocate, where they don't really care much about sustainability. They just want to have the highest output they can possibly get. And unfortunately, high output Goals promote the idea of a monoculture, where instead of a like your or World War II kind of garden where you have a little bit of everything all in one space, they want just like corn as far as the eye can see, just rows and rows and rows of corn. And that is incredibly damaging because not only does it deplete the soil, especially if you're doing the same thing over and over and over. Some of them do crop rotation, which can be a little bit better, but still, it is much, much better to do a polycultural system setup. But it also makes the food less resilient, because if you have a monocrop, basically if pests come and they're like, ooh, I love that corn, they're going to destroy the entire thing. Like all of that corn is going to be destroyed. Whereas if you have a polycultural setup, you're going to have all sorts of different fruits and vegetables and types of plants available, some of which might not even be for eating. It just might be for other purposes, like holding the ground together, adding certain nutrients, bringing in certain native animals and pollinators and stuff like that. And not contrary to popular belief, like animals aren't just indiscriminate with what they eat, not even bugs. Like it seems like, especially from the movies, like they'll just come in and eat everything all at once. But animals will only eat certain things, just like people. Like we have our preferences, and certain creatures will only eat certain things. That's the whole deal with like native plants. When you have an invasive species, they're coming into an environment where they don't have any natural predators. And so bugs or even wild animals, plants, they're able to explode and their population just takes off because there's nothing there to hunt them and to take them out. So by having a diversity, you prevent complete and total loss, because there's never going to be a creature that eats every single thing in an entire cluster of different species. So it would allow the plot of land to be more resilient. You wouldn't lose all of your crops in one go. Same with diseases. If a disease wipes through the plants, if you have, like, think of it with people, if you have 1,000 people in one room together and one person has the flu, chances are 999 of them are going to end up with the flu. There's always going to be that one lucky person. But if you have like a bunch of people and some horses and some dogs and some chickens and ducks and whatever, like they're not all going to end up with the flu, because the transmission is different for each of them. So plants are the same way, where if you have a specific disease and you have all of them together in the same area, they're all going to get sick at the same time. And so again, with the pest, you can lose your entire crop in one go. That's what happened in Ireland in it was either the 1600s or 1800s, where they had the potato famine, because in Ireland, they don't have very good soil. It's very rocky. There's not much nutrients. They also have sad weather. It's always cloudy, always raining. And they had a fungus introduced into their environment, and it wiped out all the potatoes. And that was literally all they had. And so people starved to death in mass numbers because literally their only crop died. And that's kind of what you can expect if there's a disease that's able to kind of wipe out a monoculture. But with a polyculture, as I said, you'll have a wider diversity. And so you're far less likely to lose all of your crops all at once. There's a really, really cool example in Japan. They planted, I think it was over 1,000. Let me find the thing so I can give you the actual facts. I'll have to find it. Okay, I can't find it right now, but there's a garden that somebody planted as an experiment, and they put, it was a small area of land. It was like probably the size of maybe maybe somebody's front yard, maybe a bit more. But basically, they put hundreds of different types of plants in that area, and they were all like really, really close together, which a lot of people think that you can't do. Like, you have to put the plants equally spaced and whatever. But that area is flourishing, and it's all sorts of food crops, and they have a lot of stuff that you'd recognize. Like, they have peach trees, they have figs, they have like peppers and all sorts of things. I'll have to find it and share it when I eventually do find it, because it's really incredible experiment. And even though it's in a really tiny area, they are able to produce food for hundreds of people just from that small plot of land. And this is a really great example of what's possible. And another aspect of growing your own food is even the food that you do waste can be reused, because you can take the rotting vegetables and turn it into compost and use it in your garden, which will then regenerate the future plants that you're growing. So it doesn't sit in a landfill just sitting there, just being wasted. Because as I said at the very beginning, in an anaerobic environment, in an oxygen deprived environment, things can't decompose. So if you're using it in your own garden, it's immediately going back to use as opposed to just sitting somewhere. And the other aspect too is the biomass as well, where you're not adding to the quantity of trash in the landfill as well. Because sadly, in the landfill, especially in places that don't have green bins, or honestly, a lot of people just don't do it anyways, you're mixing in viable food waste with plastic and chemicals and like toys and clothing and all sorts of other stuff that does not biodegrade. And so it's not able to be broken down properly, and it's not going anywhere useful. And if anything, it could end up getting washed out into the water, which again, it can cause contamination. And with food waste, it's like it's been in your mouth, it has been like touching other things and whatnot, so it can carry a lot more bacteria as well. And when you have non-native biomatter washing out into rivers and lakes and stuff like that, you can also end up adding harmful diseases to environments that are not used to it. In the same way that I was saying, you can pass diseases through monocultures really quickly, and you can have invasive species wipe through an environment that is not used to them very quickly. The same thing happens with bacteria, where if you're introducing a bacteria that the environment is not familiar with, or that it's prime for that particular bacteria, it can allow it to proliferate really, really quickly. That's why a lot of common eradicated diseases often come from drinking dirty water. Typhoid, malaria, even though it's passed by mosquitoes, it's still kind of transmitted from water. Dysentery, a lot of those old world diseases that we have heard about before that would kill people. Anything really that causes digestive upset, a lot of those are transmitted from food or from water. And when you get it from your food, it's because of the water that it has either intook or that has been put on it. So food waste is seemingly a simple problem, but it connects to so many different areas of our lives. Not only does it affect the emissions that we produce, it affects the accessibility to food. it also has a link to illnesses and disease, to environmental degradation. And to continue on this path is to risk future production of food being damaged, because landfills also take up space that we could be using for crops. I think let me look up the it does not say. An average landfill size is 600 acres, with over 3,000 active landfills in the United States. As much as 1,800,000 acres of habitat have been converted into landfill space. So we are using imagine how much food we could produce if we had 1,800,000 acres left, or to back for use. That could definitely support hundreds of thousands of families. I think it was 5,000 acres per family, something like that. So that would definitely contribute to the issue of food waste, or at least contribute to food production. But I wanted to do this before Thanksgiving to help people think. It's obviously not possible to never waste a thing, because there are going to be components that you're going to throw away the apple stems. You're probably not going to be eating the rind of the orange, but start considering alternate uses for food. There are ways to repurpose things. There are ways to reuse things that would originally be thrown away. Sometimes for myself, if I have fruits or vegetables that I'm not using, not only will I use my food waste to feed the mealworms, which I feed my gecko, but I'll also throw it out into our yard. That way animals can have it. You do have to be a bit careful with that, because some of the animals can't have all of those foods. So you do have to pay attention to what you're throwing out there. You can't just give wildlife your chicken bones or whatever. But a lot of the vegetables are usually safe. But also be more inventive with the food that you get. Don't just try to find ways to preserve things that you're not going to finish. And then another big thing too is when you fill your plates, make sure you're filling your plates with what you're actually going to finish, especially if you're in a situation where it's like a restaurant or a place where you're taking food from somebody else. And if you have uneaten packaged foods, donate them. There's food banks, homeless shelters, even for pet food, you can donate it to animal shelters. There's all sorts of different programs that will take your uneaten food before it expires. That way you don't have canned foods and packaged foods sitting in your pantry just going to waste. So try to rethink what you're consuming and how you're consuming it to find other ways to either repurpose or reuse or reduce, that key RRR phrase, to help yourself, to help the planet, to help your family, because also finding new ways to reuse foods that you think you're not going to use is good for your brain too. It contributes to your creativity, can help you come up with new meal ideas. And there's hundreds of thousands of articles, YouTube videos, TikTok videos, posts online of people talking about ways to reuse food scraps, ways to reuse food waste. I also really love, let me see if I have it. Yeah. I have books from the like 30s, 40s, and even before. I think this one's from the 1800s, that are guides for what they used to do. And so you can learn from housewives and families that lived years and years ago, to see what they had done to reuse everything. Because before the 50s, before the proliferation of the supermarkets, the big saying was waste not, want not. Like, you were to use up everything that you had because that's all you had. You couldn't just go to the store and get whatever. Like, you had to be very, very careful with everything that you owned, with everything, and find ways to reuse everything. While not related to cooking, to food, even in the Victorian era with their clothing, if like their shirt ripped, the sleeves ripped off or something, they would just turn it into a vest. Or if their pants ripped, they would turn them into like underpants and stuff like that. So like, there are ways to start converting things, to divert things away from the landfill. Because once things are in the landfill, it poses a risk for your health. People that live near them get sick. Animals that live near them, waterways that live near them get contaminated and get sick. So we're helping even our neighbors by diverting things from these landfills, and by finding new ways to reuse things that we normally would throw away. And this really applies to anything. If like, there are ways to reuse paper scraps, there are ways to reuse plastic bags, there are ways to reuse old toys and old jewelry and old clothes. And the creativity that we use is going to benefit us in the long run in many different ways, for our neuroplasticity, our brain, but also for our relationship with everything around us. Because the more we start to see things as reusable and as a commodity rather than just trash, the more we're going to change our perspective of the entire world and the things that are produced for us. And we'll have a higher level of gratitude for what we do have. And we'll start to also see more of the damages that our system causes. And by knowing the damages that our system causes, we can prevent ourselves from being a contributing factor to the entire thing. So this Thanksgiving, and even going forward, start, one, being grateful for what you do have, and two, try to find ways to make use of all of the things that you do have that benefit yourself, benefit your family, and benefit other people, because I promise you'll be happier and you'll be healthier in the long run.
By examining his own attitude towards the possibilities of peace, towards the Soviet Union, towards the course of the Cold War.
Art muscle. It was a way of making me feel that they were a part of me.
You see it on the bridge. Wait, how they get it? If the government had to change the screw in the bridge, they had to shut it down. They got state troopers out there. They got lanes closed. They got their own strange machines. How did they